VIII, one of the most popular monarchs of England, and that was the last historic play he wrote, considering he didn't write one about Elizabeth just yet. Okay, these are the plays that I'm going to be talking about, and I'm also going to add a few historic notes saying how the monarchies were lined up and background stories and whatnot, beginning with Richard II. Richard II. He was one of the more feminine types of kings, or so Shakespeare describes him. Now, his rule was very short, mostly because he was what we call a seeker of popularity. Moreover, he sought favoritism with the other nobles of the court. In the play Richard II, Richard banishes his cousin, the future Henry IV, for brawling with another noble over the subject of treason. Henry IV, later, I think his name is Hotspur? Yes, Hotspur is debating with another, I think it's another lord, who is the traitor. And Hotspur is saying, this man's a traitor, the other man is saying, Hotspur's a traitor. So Richard decides to basically say, you know, fight it out, and whoever wins, that settles the argument. It's a fight to the death, though, but at last minute, Richard cancels the fight and banishes them both. Now, when Hotspur's father dies, he comes back with a new title. He was banished as Hotspur, but comes back as the lord with this title. And that starts up a rebellion because Richard still wants Hotspur out of the picture. Since they're royal blood, they're cousins, he's a threat to the crown. And that's when the rebellion overcomes Richard, and he is deposed of the throne, and Henry becomes king. And under Henry's rule, but not by his command, Richard is murdered right before his eyes. Now, Henry IV. He ruled with a guilty conscience. Richard, despite his faults, he was his cousin. He was family. Despite the rebellion, he was his family. So he weighed with that guilty conscience throughout the rest of his life. And then he had something else on his conscience. His son, Prince Hal, who in the play, Portia William Shakespeare, describes as a bit of a rebellious youth, or a man who's seeking life outside of the court, who's trying to get a sense of real life. And now Henry's got that on his conscience. He's looking at his son and saying, this can't be my son. There's another cousin of mine who has a better son than mine. I wish his son was mine because he's a nobleman. He's actually got a heart and soul for this city, for the whole country. How? All he wants to do is hang out with thieves and bandits. That's the point of this play, until the rebellious one, the rebellious cousin, poses a threat to Prince Hal's crown. And that's when Prince Hal really kicks in. He says, you know what, I gotta kill this guy, or else he's gonna challenge me to my right for the throne. So then there's that, and that's Henry IV, part 1 and 2. Henry V. What is Henry V best known for? The war against France. Primarily, the Battle of Agincourt. Barely hundreds against French armies, thousands of Frenchmen, and the entire battlefield was won by the English. Strategy, as well as precision. Anyways, so Prince Henry, after winning the battle of Agincourt, made a peace treaty with the King of France. He therefore married the King of France's daughter, but died a year later. And his son later inherited the throne. Prince Henry VI. Yes. Henry VI also married a French princess, but later on in life he went a little crazy. And that's when the War of the Roses started. The war between the Plantagenets, who were the White Roses, and sons of York, and the Lancasters. That's Henry's family. Edward IV was a Plantagenet king who won the crown on the battlefield. In his early reign, he married a noblewoman named Elizabeth Woodville, whose mother actually hosted Joan of Arc before her death. Her mother was Jacquetta Woodville, a French colonist. Jacquetta Woodville married John Woodville, who was merely a squire of her first husband, and he later became Baron Rivers. So that's who Elizabeth Woodville's parents were. Elizabeth Woodville was originally married to Lord Grey. She had 2 sons by him, and when her husband died in battle against the Plantagenet York family, she then married the king because he fell in love with her because, of course, she was so beautiful. And their reign, she gave birth to several children, but their first child was a girl, Elizabeth. Richard was Henry's brother, his youngest brother. And when Edward died, wait, did I say Henry? Was Henry's brother? Yeah. Anyways, he was Edward's youngest brother. And Edward had 2 sons, I believe, Edward and Richard. Edward was a young boy when Edward Sr. passed away. So Richard sought this chance to take the throne for himself. He did so, and he imprisoned the 2 boys, the 2 sons of Edward IV, in the tower. And according to history, the 2 boys simply disappeared. This is all historical facts. This is not based on the play. I don't think Shakespeare wrote a play on Edward IV. So, anyways, Richard III, though. Everyone says, and history says, that Richard was a hunchback, and of course, Shakespeare mainly notes that, and he expresses it fully in most of Richard's monologues in the play. Anyways, so Richard III had a main nemesis, who was actually a son of the Lancastrian throne, who later became Henry VII. Richard III died in battle against Henry VII, and the daughter of Elizabeth Woodville and Edward IV, Elizabeth Jr., was then married to Henry VII. In order for Henry VII to have a legal claim, he needed to have his predecessors, or predecessors, heir to the throne. So. Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, Elizabeth gave to Henry 4 children, Margaret and Mary, who were both married off to foreign kings, and Arthur and Henry. Arthur was originally supposed to marry Catherine of Aragon, the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabel of Spain. A year into their marriage, however, he passed away, and Catherine was locked away because King Henry wanted to keep her dowry. Later on, his younger son, Henry, at the age of 16, was then wed to Catherine. And when Henry VII passed away, Henry VIII became king. Henry VIII is one of the most popular monarchs in English history. However, the play that Shakespeare wrote about him is one of the least popular. Henry VIII is most commonly known not only for his reformation of the Church of England, but also for his 6 wives. Catherine of Aragon was his first, and to him she bore many children, but only one survived, a daughter. Back then, women were considered inferior to men, or rather, more unimportant. This is a monologue of Catherine of Aragon from the play. It's during the trial that was held when Henry wanted to divorce her because his reason was he wasn't really sure that her marriage to his older brother Arthur hadn't been consummated. That was the only way that the Pope could give them a dispensation to marry in the first place, if her first marriage to his oldest brother had not been consummated. Anyways, but his real reason for the divorce, well, 2 reasons. 1, because she had not given him a living son. And 2, he was in love with one of her maidens, Anne Boleyn. This is the monologue during her trial, when she's pleading to him, "What have I done to upset you in all the years that we've been married? I am a most poor woman and a stranger, born out of your dominions, having here no judge indifferent, nor no more assurance of equal friendship and proceeding. Alas, sir, in what have I offended you? What cause hath my behavior given to your displeasure, that thus you should proceed to put me off, and take to your good grace from me. Heaven witness, I have been to you a true and humble wife, at all times to you your will comfortable, ever in fear to kindle your dislike, yea, subject to your countenance, glad or sorry as I saw it inclined. When it was the hour I ever contradicted your desire, or made it not mine too, or which of your friends have I not strove to love, although I knew he were my enemy? What friend of mine that had to him derived your anger, did I continue in my liking? Catherine of Aragon was divorced by Henry VIII, and then he married Anne Boleyn, who, during her seduction of him, promised him a son, the one thing he craved and obsessed over the most. However, she too failed to deliver. She did deliver him, though, a single living daughter, their firstborn, Elizabeth, who later became, next to Henry VIII, the greatest monarch of all English history. Anne Boleyn was executed for this, and upon charge of witchcraft. These are all 6 of Henry VIII's wives. Catherine of Aragon, daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. Anne Boleyn, supposedly a descendant, or rather, yes, a descendant of either the Lancastrian or the Plantagenets. Jane Seymour, one of Anne Boleyn's ladies-in-waiting. The one wife to give him his one living son, Edward VI. Anne of Cleves, a German princess, also a Protestant. Divorced on the same year that they were married, but she, thankfully, lived. Catherine Howard, a mere girl of 14, so beautiful, and yet she was accused of treason for having numerous lovers. Now, may I just brief note, the reason that it's considered treason for a queen to have lovers is because the queen carries a future. She conceives that child could either be the king's son, the king's heir, or another's bastard. If a queen conceives a bastard, then that bastard could try to claim the throne. Catherine Parr, the wife to finally outlive King Henry VIII. The reason she stayed alive is because King Henry VIII had a wound upon his leg. It was broken, and it was a disgusting sore. Catherine Parr was the only woman, or only person in history, to have known how to properly treat the wound, and that saved her life. These are the children of Henry VIII. His living son, Edward, who lived till he was 15, died of sickness. Mary Tudor, who ruled for 5 years. She was the daughter of Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon. She married a Spanish prince and brought back the Catholic Church to England. And throughout history, she's known as Bloody Mary for all of her executions of Protestants and heretics. And of course, the greatest monarch in all history and a personal hero of mine, Elizabeth. She ruled for 45 years, until the age of 70, and she died in 1603. In her role, Shakespeare created his plays. And then here's the man himself, William Shakespeare, a genius, and writer of some of the most beautiful plays, and some of the funniest. Personally, a favorite of mine is Much Ado About Nothing, and Midsummer Night's Dream, of course. Next. Then here are some film versions of either Shakespeare's plays or some of the historical notes I was making. We have Ian McKellen, aka Gandalf, as Richard III. We have the Hollow Crown, which is a BBC series, and it is mainly the lineage of Richard II, all the way down to Henry V. We have, I do not know this actor's name, but I know he was in Skyfall as the computer genius, as Richard II. We have the ever most wonderful Jeremy Irons as Henry IV, and the man who plays Loki from the Avengers as Henry V, Tom Hiddleston. And we also have one of the greatest Shakespearean actors in history, Kenneth Branagh, here as Henry V. And over here, the man at the top, we have Aneurin Bernard as Richard III in the TV show The White Queen. The White Queen is mainly the story of Elizabeth Elizabeth Woodville and her love story with King Edward and the lineage from then on. And as you can see, he's not a hunchback. Now we have the Tudors, which is the entire story of how Henry VIII fell in love with Anne Boleyn, all the way down to his death, and the Reformation of the Catholic Church of England. And that's it. Thank you for your time.